The International Monetary Fund, IMF, cited that the central bank intervention in Nigeria's foreign exchange market was a hindrance to capital inflows. That was then. Sequel to that, there have been changes in both the leadership of the CBN and, exchange market, foreign exchange market in Nigeria. So for more in-depth analysis on this, I will be joined virtually by Ayo Teriba shortly. Ayo is the CEO, Economic Associates. But in-house here, I've got with me Idahosa Osamanze. He is the Vice President, Femi Walsh Media. Idahosa, thank you for joining us this morning.
Vivian, good morning.
Good morning. You look bright and easy today.
It's Friday.
Yeah, thank God it's Friday. So, if you remember, not too long ago, in fact, just last week, one of the things we talked about was Ajaokuta Steel as we were counting down to Nigeria's 63rd birthday. Yeah. So this is what happened overnight as the Minister of Steel Development, one of the newest ministries in Nigeria. He visited Ajaokuta. That was his maiden visit, and this was what he said. So I'll just stop to you as I read this out. The Minister of Steel Development, Prince Shaibu Abubakar Audu, has revealed that the federal government plans to make Ajaokuta Environ a free trade zone to attract foreign direct investment and to diversify the economy. Now, Abubakar Audu disclosed this at his maiden visit to the Ajaokuta Steel Company Limited on Wednesday as he took a tour around the complex. It's one of the things I plan to do, though, to take a tour around the Ajaokuta Steel Complex. But let me come to you. How does this hit you, this news now, as regards attracting federal FDI?
Well, I don't want to celebrate so much because there are a lot of free trade zones in Nigeria that are really not as active as they should be. That's because if you have gone elsewhere, where I come from the UAE, you can see one free zone housing over 30,000 companies in just one zone. And it's like that spread across the entire length and breadth of the country. And people are coming and they're able to do business. You see, it's one thing for you to put your policy on the ground. Another thing is for the policy itself to be successful, as it were. You just said just now, FDI in last year fell. Because if you look at the preceding year, 2020, it rose by 50% from about 2.3 trillion to about 4.8 billion US dollars in 2021. And of course, we saw a decline in 2022. And of course, the reason for that decline, they are not far-fetched. Number one, you remember there was a whole lot of foreign exchange liquidity. We didn't have so much of dollars here in the market, and therefore foreigners who came to do business with us couldn't repatriate their fund back home, which is the real problem. And you see where, of course, this kind of businesses run, you have enough liquidity that people who do business, like in the UAE, you can take away your profit wholesale 100%, and state is not holding you. And here you're having that your government need to make policy to ensure that some people cannot take foreign exchange away, and this will not really attract people to come. That's number one. Number two, we also look at the regulatory framework around some of all these things. Take, for example, what are the incentives that are going to be on the ground for this free trade zone to run? We have to also determine it. In UAE, for example, you know, there's nothing like corporate tax. It's free. So you register your company, you make your money, and you take it out. There's nothing like what they call payee. They've not introduced it. And these are sets of incentives the government has put in place to ensure that people want to bring in money, because what is the driver and the motivation for business is profit. And this is very critical. Now, the nation need to sit down around table to rethink about these things and see, are we really ready? There's the issue of infrastructure, issue of logistics problem, which we are still grappling with. You are going to be thinking that if people are going to be bringing in things into Nigeria and shipping it out, what is the flexibility of the logistics? Are we also thinking of dredging the river Niger so that there will be another port in that area so that things can come in freely and go out freely without really necessarily increasing the cost of production? These are issues that, of course, the government really need to sit down and think about before we can say, yes, you can make it a free trade zone, but it's really not adding value. And this is where, for me, is important that most times it is good for us to put a framework on the ground before we make announcements.
Political instability, security concerns, as well as regulatory issues. She said these things can deter potential investors, attracting the nation's overall attractiveness to FDI. I'd like for you to react to that.
Yeah, I think there are fundamental issues that are raised. Political stability is a big challenge. And of course, like you see what's going on right now following our elections in 2023, that we have not been able to go over the victory and the losses. It's a really huge challenge because not also forget the fact that in about 3 African countries in recent time, you've had coups happen. And so a lot of people become suspicious and they are not really, won't be at ease to want to bring their money to your economy. So this is a real lot of problem. And I think this is one of the issues that has affected us as a nation over the years, where political contestations look like warfare, especially in most of African countries. People do elections and they cannot simply accept victory or defeat, as it were. So this is a big problem because those who are bringing in their money, they are also thinking that if I put in my money and all of a sudden the constitution is suspended, legal issues become another problem. This is one. Now, again, tied to this political issue is also the legal environment. The legal environment, where, of course, you find that you can start a case in Nigeria, but you may not necessarily know where you're going to complete it. And this, again, is a problem because when you enter into a contract and there are litigations, now provisions for resolutions must be simple enough to attract people to come. That's one side of it, and we need to deal with that. Now, we also have a 40 federation, which, of course, have to deal with the issues of regulation that you speak about. I mentioned UAE just now. Now, when you get to the UAE, it's like a federation.
It's like?
Yes, a federation.
Okay.
Yeah, you see, they're a federation, really, so to speak, because all the 7 component states of the UAE, they call them the Emirates, they all operate within their sphere of influence. And the things that they talk about at the General Council are the things that affect everybody. And that's why when you hear this morning really news about Sharjah, Sharjah is doing its business. Dubai is on its own. Abu Dhabi is on its own. There is no any disturbances. So if they want to do a thing, it is not the central government that determines what happened in Dubai or what happened in the UAE. They have power to be able to say, this is what I want to do. And this is a problem with our federation. Now, if, for example, the Minister of Steel is saying, no, we want to open up this place. Now, how do you really find a cooperation of Kogi State government, for example? Because Kogi State government is looking for revenue. And they're going to trouble these people. These are regulation issues that can be conflicting. And these are real issues that we would need to define as a nation. I understand where the boundaries are, who can do what. And then once these are clear enough and the people can see it and they meet the rule of logic, it is easy for people to say, let me bring my money to your environment and invest. The real truth of the matter is that the resources are here. The opportunities are here. They are all still lying within the realm of potential. But we need to put the ecosystem in place that will make this happen in real time.
Yeah, to add to your list, the market is also here, right?
Well, for market, it's a different question altogether.
Okay. All right. Maybe I'll have you dig into that kettle of fish. I got Aya, who just joined us. Aya, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I understand that he's gone off again. I do hope you get to join us, Ayo, because I would like for you to react to all the things Idahosa has just mentioned. You know, we've been talking about how, okay, Ayo is back. It's like NEPA. You come on, you go off, you come Ayo, I'm just joking. It's good to have you. Let me do an intro all over again. Ayo Teriba is the CEO, Economic Associates. Thank you so much, Ayo, for joining us this morning. So just to bring you up to speed, we started by saying that in April this year, the National Bureau of Statistics reported that foreign direct investments, FDI, into Nigeria fell by 33% to $468.91 million in 2022, and that is the lowest in at least 9 years. Idahosa in-house has been reacting to this news by spelling out some of the pitfalls that makes Nigeria, or that made Nigeria less attractive for foreign direct investments. I want you to give us your take as to this piece of news.
Okay, right. Good morning to you. Good morning, viewers. 2022 is not your ordinary year. It's a special year because it was a pre-election year. And it was a pre-election year in which many feared that we might have if you like, a difficult transition. I mean, that election might be violent, it might be inconclusive, and all the rest of it. It wasn't just that investors voted with their legs ahead of the election. Quite a few Nigerians traveled out as well, you know, trying to avoid any possible disruptions at election time, only for them to find that the 2023 election was relatively peaceful and was conclusive, even if matters had to get to the court for resolution. And thus far, the court, the election petition body has affirmed the outcome of the election, has vindicated INEC, and confirmed that the president has been validly elected. Not many expected that level of conclusiveness about the 2023 election. And yeah, matters still have to get to the Supreme Court, but there's no reason why you would not assume that things will remain as peaceful as they have been, even if not more peaceful. So the world would have regarded Nigeria to have been in recess while we were trying to manage the political transition. And upon the conclusion of the political transition, we've seen a new government that has been grabbing the bull by the horns and confronting problems that have been here with us for many years, if not for decades, the fuel subsidy, the multiple exchange rates, and the trouble with some of our institutions like the Central Bank of Nigeria. And we've seen a more transparent policy management rather than trying to sweep the foreign exchange premium under the carpet. They've unified the market. Everybody can see whether the rates are converging or the rates are diverging. So there is constant pressure on government to do something. And led by the president himself, the government has started to do things. For example, they promised not to increase debt, not to issue additional debt. They've said they would rely mainly on equity, both cross-border equity that we refer to as FDI, which is the subject of this conversation, and domestic equity as the major sources of recharging the fiscal and the foreign exchange situation. And once, well, we've seen progress on the cross-border equity end. The president has got commitments of 14 billion US dollars foreign direct investment from Indian companies. When he made his trip to India about a month ago, and that overshadows this news that FBI is bringing out of, what a factory sum we got last year. So if in the first 4 months of the regime, they managed to secure $14 billion in foreign direct investment commitments, Nigeria is on to a good start. I had always affirmed that investors believe in Nigeria's prospects. They're eager to bring their money to Nigeria, but Nigeria was not ready for investors. We saw 8 years of President Buhari's rule, in which he had a preference for borrowing rather than for allowing investors to come in. At home and abroad, the government only issued debt for 8 years, and they funded their activities more with debt than with revenue. So they rather borrow from the bond markets. They would rather go to Eurobond market in London. They would rather go to central bank for ways and means advances. Now, this government is changing that, saying that they can't borrow anymore. And they are engaging investors very seriously. And the response we got when they made the trip to India shows you that investors have truly always been eager. It was a case of Nigeria snubbing investors. It wasn't the case of Nigeria. It wasn't the case of investors snubbing Nigeria. Some of those 14 billion commitments had been waiting to happen. You had a government that preferred to go to China to borrow, or to go to Eurobonds to borrow, than to allow investors to come and take a stake. So you are quoting 2022 figure, which was the end of that 8-year period, on which the preference was for debt. Even the investors came out, as many of them did, they still go back unable to invest because government didn't want equity. So I'm hoping to see in the coming months and in the coming years, if the government sticks to the current course in which we are likely to soon come up with a list of sectors that we want to fund with equity, that Nigeria might be on a renewed path, of increased foreign exchange liquidity, increased fiscal liquidity, and increased systemic liquidity. Like, countries that has most recently traveled in that path, like Saudi Arabia and like India. Equity provides a more dignified, more enduring financing options for countries, in which you allow other people to come and invest in your local assets to unlock new growth, new jobs, and new revenue for government. So I do think that while we should have started on this journey like 8 years ago, when commodity prices collapsed, we had delayed, but it's better late than never. The window of opportunity is still open. The world is richer in foreign direct investment today than it is in export opportunities. The world stock of foreign direct investment is in excess of 40 trillion, but the world exports are stagnated at about 20 billion, and the leading exporters in the world are daggers drawn. China, US, or Britain leaving Brexit, leaving the European single market over concerns about exports. No country is getting richer through exports these days, and the prospects of exports is likely to become even more bleak going forward because of weak commodity prices. Perhaps I should pause there and let you ask any further questions that you may have.
Are you a mind reader? I was going to say I need to come in here because I want Idahosa to react to some of these things you said. You know, he said that if this current administration stays the course, that the tide will turn. But there's something important he also did. He made a contrast between this current administration and its predecessor. I'd like you to react to that as regards borrowing and all of the germane points he raised as well.
Yeah, I think Ayo made very, very valid responses, and all the arguments are in order. Just to understand, is to look at the philosophy that drives people. You see, the Muhammadu Buhari regime was a pro-poor regime, and incidentally became anti-business.
Anti-business.
Yes, and that is the real posture that you had in the 8 years. And so all that the regime was just concerned about was to see how to fight the alligator in the swamp in terms of dealing with poverty. So that was a challenge. And that's what is actually making him very significantly different from the Bola Tinubu regime, which is pro-business. And like he's always said, there is no government who really can be pro-poor and be anti-business. And the only way to be pro-poor is to be pro-business, because it's only businesses that can take people away from poverty. So what the regime is doing at the moment is trying to drain the swamp, which is the real easier way to deal with the challenge of poverty and getting people to have access to capital so that they can actually be able to purchase.
Fantastic. Aya, let me come back to you. Seeing as this channel is a solutions-based channel, let's try to chart the course ahead and see how to make Nigeria more attractive for foreign investments outside what the current administration is already doing. But perhaps I should read this out to you, because I don't know if you caught it at the beginning. We said earlier on that the Minister of Steel Development, Shaibu Abakar Audu, said just this Wednesday, that the federal government plans to make the Ajaokuta environ a free trade zone to attract foreign direct investment and to diversify the nation's economy. What's your reaction to this?
The point in terms of the philosophy, you know, of the kind of economic policy that the government should pursue is that the global economic realities makes, I'm so sorry, makes I'm so sorry about that. The global economic realities make it, you know, leaves you with only a very sensible option: foreign direct investment. And all agencies of government should bring on stream whatever projects that they have and make efforts to attract foreign direct investment to them. Creating a free trade zone is a good idea, but more than creating a free trade zone for other people to come and invest in, every agency of government should come up with projects of their own that they want to attract foreign investment into. Free trade zone is good, but it's not enough. Much of the projects that we need to invest, that we need to attract investment into, are owned by government. So I want to welcome FDI investors, who may be private companies wanting to invest in private opportunities is good, but will not be enough. The bulk of Nigeria's national assets are held and owned and superintended over by government. So will the conversation that had been opened up by the investors coming from India had been good enough? They pointed to specific agencies where they want to make their investment in. For example, the DICON, owned by Nigeria's military. So each agency should come out and name the agencies, they are watched, that they are willing to allow 1% foreign direct investment, 2%, 5%, 10%, and let's aggregate these, because at this time, it's not just that the world is very, the world has a glut of foreign direct investments looking for destinations. Nigeria needs foreign direct investment. We need to join the ranks of countries the size of Nigeria. Nigeria is the 7th largest population in the world. And if you compare the foreign direct investment that we currently host with what our peers host, we are way behind. We are the only ones that is doing just a little over 100 billion in FDI stock. Whereas some of our peers are doing 500 billion. Some of them are doing 1 trillion in FDI stocks. So Nigeria should open up, specifically led by the government. We are fortunate enough to have attracted FDI into LNG. We are fortunate enough to have attracted FDI into the telephony, the GSM telephony. But the rail sector is there. We should stop that policy of borrowing from China to develop it and open the space to foreign direct investors like we did telecoms. The power transmission is there. We keep saying that power generation is not Nigeria's problem. Power transmission is. But power transmission is still owned 100% by government. If foreign direct investment had been good for telecoms, that we now have 200 million lines or more, it should also be good enough for power transmission. It should be good enough for rail and other sectors like that. So government should come up with a list of assets that are only held at the moment by the government and begin to declare, what space they want to open for investors, even if it is 5%, 5% equity investment opportunity, 10%, 20%, which doesn't make it become, only private owned. It will still be majority government owned, like Aramco. The Saudi Arabia has only sold less than 2% of the equity in Aramco. Government still owns 98.1%. Private sector owns 1.9%. So Aramco is still government owned, but in the market now is worth 2.1 trillion US dollars. So our NNPC, our refineries, I'm not saying that government should sell them, because if they are good enough for private sector to buy, they must be good enough for government to keep. But I'm saying that government should, open up opportunities for foreign direct investment and even domestic direct investment. Let the private sector own something, even if what the private sector owns remains a minority stake. But again, in LNG, the private sector owns 51% and government owns 49%. So I'm willing to encourage government to go that far with any of the assets that we have that are currently idle, that are not being managed optimally, including the NNPC. All the 3 stages of the NNPC, upstream, downstream, where they fail. We have 4 refineries that fail to refine any of our crude, and we keep importing. So restructure NNPC, you've dealt with the central bank. What are we waiting for? Deal with the NNPC as well. Break them up. You separate the upstream from the midstream and from the downstream, and let the market invest in the refineries. If you inject 1% of private equity into the refineries, they will work. It's only when government owns it 100% that they won't work. So basically, I would say that's the way forward. Creating a free zone is opening space, for assets owned by others. I want the conversation to go as far as I'm creating a free zone, and in this free zone, government-owned assets are going to account for what percentage. So you can't say, okay, we have the Lekki free zone now. How much business is government itself doing? How much of national assets, how much of Lagos state government assets is thriving in the free trade zone? So you can't say I'm opening up a space for others, whereas the bulk of the assets that can make Nigeria rich, the bulk of the assets that investors will jump at are owned by you. But you are not saying anything about how investors will have opportunity to invest, in assets owned, by either the state government or the federal government. We should begin to be that specific about our conversation, with investment. You can't say I opened a free trade zone, but I'm going to go to Afrexim Bank to go and borrow 3 billion in exchange for future output. You are eating your lunch. You are eating your tomorrow's lunch today. That's not what we want. We don't want to forego any of our tomorrow's output. Leave our income. Don't pledge our income away. Stop signing IOUs to anybody. We need that income tomorrow. Let them bring investment now and go and invest in idle assets and create additional income for us tomorrow. We will get the cash today when they invest, and we will never have to service it. We'll never have to pay it back. And it's going to, make idle assets become active. We're going to generate employment. That's what we want. We want investment. 14 billion is good for a start, but we're looking for 140 billion. And more agencies of government should begin to be proactive. Don't wait for foreign investors to come and point to what they want. You push forward, where you want them to come and invest. And you join the ranks of India. India has attracted about $900 billion in FDI in the past 15 years, and 500 billion of it since 2015, when it was that we hit trouble. So if we too can begin to count the deals like that, you forget about exchange rate not being stable. And once the exchange rate is stable, once this currency is trendy, you forget about inflation, running away. Because the main driver of the exchange rate, the main driver of the inflation is exchange rate pass-through. As a matter of fact, your exchange rate is the #1 headache that the country has to stabilize. And the only way to stabilize your exchange rate is to have foreign reserve adequacy. It comes down to FDI. If exchange rate is stable, pump prices will be stable. Airline tickets will be stable. Because much of the problems that we have elsewhere in the domestic economy are just passed through from exchange rate, to prices, and it makes life people difficult. If exchange rate is stable, the real wage of workers will be stable. So all the problem we are grappling with in these first few days of a government that is reform-minded is coming from an unstable exchange rate. And the way out, get adequate foreign exchange liquidity. You may even be able to get the Naira back to where it was before the unification if you get a sufficient amount of inflow of foreign exchange. And you kill all this conversation about raise minimum wage, raise this, raise that. Let me pause there.
Recommendations that you just made, and your pause is we saying thank you to you, actually, because we're going to be letting you go, but this has been a very robust conversation with you. Thank you so much. Ayo Teriba is the CEO, Economic Associates. Ayo, we do hope that when we call on you again, you will honor our invitation. Thank you so much. Now, Idahosa, one of the things Ayo mentioned was the refineries. He said 4 of Nigeria's refineries which are not functional. I don't know if you've heard of the news that was broke during the week that the Warri and Port Harcourt refineries are going to be refining, guess what, 160 barrels per day, not 160,000, 160 barrels per day. So Ayo talked about government's stranglehold on businesses. He also talked about a stable exchange rate. He said if you have that, you're good. Please, would you react to that as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the points that Ayo had made, for me, they all sink. What I will say to the government is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Qatar's 8-change model of managing change when you come into a place. I will say at the moment where we are, the Bola Tinubu administration is on item 3. Item 1, we have been able to create a sense of urgency, that is, which speaks to the need to do things differently. And that came when the president said, subsidy is gone and all this waste, we have to find a way to plug it. We don't want any more debt and these other ones. And then, of course, he has put together a guiding coalition, people who are going to live out this new direction. And then, of course, the strategy and the vision is in place, so we know where we are going. We know the philosophy that, of course, the regime is driving. Now we are now at a very critical moment, and that is the stage 4 of the quarter phase of change, which is communicating the vision. You see, the real obstacle to Nigerian progress is the public service.
I know you've said this before.
And until these people buy into this vision, to understand that it's either we sink or swim, we will be where we are. And I think this is important, and this is where this government really needs a lot of efforts. That people come to realize that, look, we are all endangered. And we cannot continue to do things the same way all over and expect a different outcome. That would be insanity. So, the real reason why the refineries are not working is because of the people working there.
How about the outdated...
That mind shift need to happen. That's one part. And then, of course, we dovetail into the 5th leg, which is, of course, removing the barriers which are created by Extant Plus. And once this is done, we will begin to see the 6th phase, which is seeing the low-hanging fruits. People are beginning to feel the impact in terms of employment, in terms of the buying power of the population. And this is what government really need to do, and then consolidate the change. This is the prescription. And I think this is what this regime needs to take seriously. Communication, communication, and communication is serious, especially 2 different stakeholders who will need to support this vision of Mr. President to make Nigeria a prosperous entity.